to the cloud. Okay, so now this session is being recorded. So the way it works is being recorded, so it will be shared with Peter and myself, and we'll upload it to YouTube as well for people to access. If you don't want your cameras to be recorded, when you do ask your question, the best way is to shut it off. Then your camera won't be recorded and only your voice will be. But if you don't mind your camera being on, we're fine with that. So that's the whole conscientiousness bit out of neuroticism. And on this note, I would like to introduce Peter Saville. And this gives me incredible joy to actually being able to introduce Peter, because since joining the world of psychometrics 10 years ago or so, but who's counting, I was presented with Peter as this enigmatic, almost mythical creature, which goes around changing the world of psychometrics. And pretty much what also surprised me is that everybody I talked to had only good things to say about Peter, which was just absolutely fantastic. And therefore, when I got a chance to read Peter's book, I definitely took him up on that. By the way, interesting title, Testing Times, very apt. And Peter, because he can't help himself, created a new psychometric, the 192I, which is also really exciting. But that's enough about me. Over to Peter. So Peter, what brings you here?
Your invitation, Nikita.
In one. Excellent. Well, thank you for answering that invitation.
People often ask me what brought me into psychometrics. Well, I took psychology major at the University of Leicester. I was very, very lucky because I was told by Robert McHenry, the Don at Oxford, that they had a very young department when I joined, and it was considered one of the best in the country. There being just 40 universities there. So the guy who developed the cheese model for pilot error and success was actually lecturing on individual differences and had worked at NASA on selection of astronauts. We had Professor Slukin who'd worked with Lorenz on his basic work. So it was a very vibrant young department, which the head of the department had built up. They divided you out in the first year into special subject. And Professor Lee, the head of the department, was quite aggressive. And if you did well in your exams in the first year, you stayed in special subject. If you did less well, 3/4 were put into combined subject. Somehow I managed to scrape through to get into special subject. When I left, finding a job in psychology was not easy. I was working as a milkman, working on a building site and other jobs, applied to government departments for a couple of months and got no reply from them. I had to phone them up later to find out that I hadn't been selected for interview. And then a post came up in Windsor at the National Foundation for Educational Research Test Division, which had a virtual monopoly of all the psychometric tests being used in the educational, occupational, and clinical fields. Only 10% of our work was occupational. The rest was the far bigger educational market and the clinical market with things like the vector scales. I was brought in as an assistant psychologist to anglicize American tests, so mainly American then, and then validate, norm them, and produce norm supplements and books on them. I always remember taking my predecessor who just retired, his name was Mr. Holman, very nice man, dropping him off at the Walton station on my way home from Windsor. And he said that he hated the job. And I thought my first day, well, that's great. This is a job that I'm going to hate. But actually, there was tremendous flexibility to change it into areas which interested you. So I worked initially on English proficiency tests. That was the one by Davis, used by the British Council. I got that manual into order. worked on the Dexter scale for the WISC for children, and got that into, in quote, British English rather than American English. And then a number of American tests used for apprentice selection, such as the Bennett Mechanical Comprehension Test, used in Britain for apprentice selection, which is very big then. I mean, the industry training boards like the EITB tested 150,000 apprentices a year for their various companies. So did the construction industry training board. So I then was promoted through the ranks from assistant psychologist to chief psychologist. I was there for 7 years. But my contract was one where I was allowed to go out and do outside consultancy work, such as assessments. If I did it in my own time, I received a fee. And if I did it in their time, I received half the fee. And increasingly, I was being asked to do 2, 3, 4, 5-day courses in testing, in selection. So I got a course approved by the British Psychological Society in 1974 on ability and personality testing. They were then 10 days long in all. And they were initially absolutely upset that I suggested that on the then 16PF, which I used, that there should be feedback between the person taking it and the person giving it. They thought it would do harm. I said that one should be open these sorts of things, but of course that's now part of the general courses. So I got that improved in 1974, and increasingly I was being asked to do outside work. So in 1977, I decided to leave the NFER, and they were a good employer, but I'd learnt my trade. People were phoning up and saying, what's the reliability of the WISC? What's the validity of this? I had to go to the library, look it up, and get more and more familiar with the range of tests available. And many of them were actually very old and American. The only competitor was the National Institute of Industrial Psychology, NIIP, formed in about 1922, but that had gone broke in 1975, really because they lost their commercial way. So I decided that as these various companies like Mars, BP were asking me to run these courses, which I very much enjoyed, rather than working in an office. I mean, what better than teaching stats, psychometrics, personality, individual differences, you know, in a nice hotel with an interested group of people, and being paid for it. And finally, I was either going to go out on my own. A company was going to ask me to form a company with them, where they would have 51% of the shares. And I went along to see Roger Holdsworth, who lived in Putney, South London, just South London by the Thames, to ask his opinion about what I should do. Do I go it alone, or do I actually pair up with this company called HTS, Management Consultants, where I've been running 5-day courses for them. And he, to my surprise, made a counter offer and said, well, why don't we form a publishing company together, where I held 65% of the shares and he had 35%. And I did a big validation study. I think it was for Chef and Brewer on pub management selection in my own time, ran a number of courses, thought about it until about the autumn, the fall of 1977. And I decided to go with Roger, because I realized that Roger was about roughly 10 years older than me, but he was very, very good at the structured things, which I was not good at. He was very good at accounts. He could have well been an accountant. He was a good psychologist. He liked doing assessment reports. I liked doing training and test development. And I had ideas about how we might make the test more relevant, more up to date, shorter, and frankly, better packaged than they were at the moment, which many of them look like they came from Victorian era. And I got my brother going on the design of the new tests, and that was funded from the actual courses we ran. So after some thought, in September of 77, I decided to go with Roger on that basis. And we funded the actual test development of our ability tests, which were then in pencil and paper, of course, but we did them in colour, and it had a massive effect rather than the actual dull and dreary sort of packaging that you saw of tests, which looked like they're from the 1920s. And of course, by running these various courses, unknown to me, I built up a lot of contacts in these companies. And when I went to them and said, would you trial them for me? They said, certainly. So they did all the trialing. And as trialists, of course, they immediately purchased them. So they were so different in what they looked like. Unfortunately, the book I've produced of an autobiography has got to be done in colour, some parts of it, because you really can't see the impact without seeing the difference between what was there before and what we actually did, and how we put them in kits so they're easily bought. Well, before you had about 30 components to go through, which was a headache to actually order. So that started from my garage in a place called Claygates, just outside of Esher in Surrey. But then the rise of the company was meteoric, not just in the UK, but internationally. First in Australia, then in Europe, later in North America, where we made adaptations, of course, into the local languages. And I think we grew to over 1,000 people. So that was, but it was quite interesting. Roger and I were completely different in character, in personality, but it made a good team. He was much more structured than I am. And I got on with the sales, the academic work, and more structured.
Hi, Peter. Sorry, I seem to have muted you by mistake. Can you unmute yourself? Apologies. Technical difficulties. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
How long have I gone on?
Just 10 seconds, Peter. So yeah.
Okay. So that was how the company was started. We worked from our respected homes to keep our costs right down. And I enjoyed nothing more than piling up my car, estate car, on a Sunday afternoon and going out all over the country and running 5-day courses for companies. And they in turn became customers. After 4 years, there was a demand not for ability tests, but a new personality questionnaire, which was job relevant. And I managed to actually get companies to fund it by each paying something like £5,000 each. I thought I'd get 10 or 11 companies, and we ended up with over 50 actually funding that research. So it was paid for by our customers, and in return, they paid no licensing fee. I think that history has been lost now, but that's how we funded it. It was self-funded through our own clients. Of course, as they helped in the trialing as well, they all became users of it. And that was known as the OPQ. We were going to call it the BOPQ, the British Occupational, but we changed to OPQ, the Occupational Personality Questionnaires, a version of which is IIT version is available to this day. So that ran on until we floated the company on the main London Stock Exchange, which Roger was very keen on in 1997, which I was not. I was very happy as I was. But Roger was very keen, and a lot of the directors wanted an exit strategy. So then, of course, is when you float a company, it can cost you £2 or £3 million, and you've got to become much more structured, bureaucratic, forms, all sorts of work has to be done. We did float successfully, but every member of staff was offered shares at 8p each, which was sold at something like £2.40. So Roger and I diluted our shares by 50%, effectively. So every member of staff, from our kitchen porter to our senior directors, are actually given a certain number of shares some years before. And then when we floated, they actually, well, many of those became millionaires, effectively. But they had, after all, helped the company in its worldwide development, so that was only fair. But when I became a PLC chairman, I knew it wasn't for me. It was far too stressful, because all it was board meetings with non-executive directors, which in my opinion, just did not understand psychology. And I really consider myself a psychologist more than a psychometrician. I mean, psychometrics is a method, because back in 1975, I was running assessment centres for the Trustee Savings Bank, as well as doing individual assessments as well. So I got well known for the psychometric area, but it was within the context of psychology generally. When I was at the NFER, by the way, when they made the job offer to me, I was surprised, because there were about 80 applicants to be chosen to go back for a second interview at the MIR after the first interview. They were offering it to someone with a PhD. I just had a BA in psychology. And I went back to actually be interviewed. They then offered me the job on the proviso that I had to do, and they would pay for a master's in psychology and a doctorate. So I thought, well, that sounds like a great opportunity to me. So whilst I was at the NFER, I was regarded as a full-time student. So I made sure that when I was away on courses in the evenings, I was working on my master's, my MPhil, and my doctorate, which was on the structure of Cattell 16PF. So I came out of the NFER with that experience and a BA, but also an MPhil and PhD in psychology, which I felt would really, if I'm going out on my own, would give me an advantage. But really, one's got to remember, I was so fortunate to be paid for by the NFER to do that. And it's so difficult now for young people. And when I went to university, they paid me to go to university. How crazy is that? Now it's so expensive to get masters or even bachelor's degrees in psychology or elsewhere. But back in those days, I think about 3% got to university only. And if you qualified, the local education authority would actually pay for your fees. So that's how I got through. But after about a couple of years or 5 years as chairman of a PLC, I handed over the chair to a person who was an accountant by background. And I left to form Saville Consulting, now Saville Assessments, and developing not the OPQ, but the WAVE questionnaire, because we had certain ideas with my colleagues about how it could be improved. And that became very popular. And then we had a tremendous offer from Towers Watson, who are a very good company. But again, corporate life, as the chairman of Towers Watson, knew wasn't for me. They asked me to go back after I left. And I decided to actually form 10X Psychology when I met up with Ollie Anderson, who's got a degree in mathematical statistics, in biometrics, and unusually in HR. So what we're doing now is using machine learning, predictive analytics, using a dashboard approach. So we actually have personality, motivation, well-being, a 360, all on one platform, and cognitive ability tests, all in one place, where we can see how they interact with one another. So this was so revolutionary. And also what we're doing is, rather than letting that information at higher just be left in a file, use it for learning and development purposes, having known the person's personality with their permission. So we'll be doing, it's a bad term now, perhaps, but nudge work, yeah, to actually look at where, in fact, the job is important through our ability, our competency profiler, and see what areas that we can provide online, yeah, for their training. And that's getting quite a lot of international interest, even though we've not gone public yet. So it was meeting up with Ollie Anderson, and he came from a mathematics background. I'm not as strong as him in pure mathematics, but we came to the same conclusions from different directions. So we've got a young team of about 25 people, And my view is that when we get out this terrible virus situation, we'll be ready. Yeah. And online technical solutions will become more and more popular. And to that end, we're pushing on hard. So we'll be going really live with that in the new year. So there we are. That's very quickly my background and career.
Mm-hmm. That's brilliant, Peter. Thank you so much for sharing. And what a journey from.
And why I went into psychology, because I was playing football against Wimbledon FC, and a guy jumped into my leg and put me in hospital for 6 weeks in the second year of my A level. I was going out for a girl at the time, and I got dumped by this girl. So I thought I'd go into psychology to understand the psychology of people. I don't think it's helped that much. So, but very luckily, that injury allowed me to apply late to Leicester. They gave me a series of tests because I was the only person not to have maths A level, which I wanted to do, but at the college I was at, I was not allowed to do English and maths because they clashed at the same time in the curriculum. Nowadays, I think that would be considered a good combination.
That's a fantastic.
So I found my way back to maths with psychometrics.
So it all came down to football and the girl.
Yeah, football and a girl. That sounds the name of a good film.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's interesting is that you mentioned that with your degree, you didn't have math, and with your first job, you didn't have the psych.
No, all the rest of my of the special subjects psychology got BScs. Mm-hmm. I got a BA, but did exactly the same course.
Ah, I see. I'm just really curious, Peter. You probably hired more psychs than anybody else in your lifetime.
In the private sector, yeah. I mean, the government, of course, also has a great many, but in the private sector, probably so, yeah.
Absolutely. So what makes a difference for you when you're building your teams, when you scale in companies? What do you look for in the applicants? I know you mentioned in the book the importance of asking interview questions, and I'm remembering this anecdote about asking the question one further, somebody saying, "Oh, I like nature." And then you ask him, "Well, what do you like about nature?" And he says, "Sometimes I talk to squirrel and sometimes they talk back."
Yes.
So apart from that, what do you look for in psychs?
Basically, I look for intelligence. Mm-hmm. Well, I tell you who in fact made a comment on this. We were visited by, I think it might well have been IBM in our office in Esher, in the old post house, which was our third office in the Esher area, just outside of Claygate. And we went across to have a brief bite to eat at the famous Albert pub in Esher. And we're walking across the road and we got in there, and the guy from IBM said, you select clones at SHL. I said, clones? In what way do you mean clones? He said, well, they're all extremely bright. They know their area well. You've trained them well. When you ask them questions about psychometrics, they know the answer. You don't have to go to a salesperson to get that information. So they know. They're also extremely likable. And also they deliver things on time. So I said, you're telling me they know their stuff, they're pleasant, they get the job done, yeah? And that's why you employ us? He said, yes. I said, well, can you get me some more, please? To which he just smiled. He just laughed. So no, they weren't clones. They're all very different people, but they were also enthusiastic about what they did. And they had, in certain parts of the company, of course, you need structured thinkers. Yeah? Of course you do. You've got to put a team together, because in accounts, I don't want creativity, particularly. Well, perhaps you should do, but I'd rather people that I know I can trust in that area, which I knew I could with Roger in looking after that area. But when it comes to R&D, you want people that think perhaps not out the box, but within the box. Putting things together, often perhaps 3 or 4 things that no one's thought of putting together before. Because what I did wasn't that original. really. All I did was think about, let's get them job relevant, let's get them modern, let's get them well designed, let's get them easy to use, let's make sure that we supply the same day. Well, NFER, it can take 3 months for your product to come through. I took phone calls, they would not, provided they were actually trained, yeah, and had a BPS number. They would not, that you could wait 3 months, which led to photocopying. I wouldn't blame them. If they got and assessed a child, say an ed psych, and they got to wait 3 months, I think I'd photocopy copy. But the people in charge, the ex-local government officer there, he'd never experienced and done their job. When you've been a psychologist and you've got an assessment to do, it may be the case you've forgotten to order the materials. Oh, you should have patience, he would say. And I thought, you suddenly have this demand that you haven't predicted. So why don't you get these materials out quickly? No, they could take as much as 3 months to get supplied in a queue. That was ridiculous. We supplied and got them the next day, often the same day that they were packed and out. And we made the ordering easy, not the actual codes, which were 16 letters and numbers long, which you had to go through. Yeah. In our kits of materials, we even put pencils, erasers, a stopwatch, and scrap paper in. So people didn't have to, just could say, I'll have one of those, and the cost was, say, £500. Mm-hmm. And we'll have that one, that one, that one, and that one. Done. Now, I was never trained in selling. I don't even like the term particularly. It just seems to me common sense that you actually do a good product, make it look good, yeah, and supply it quickly and actually have good people working for you. That was a formula, nothing more. And the other thing I would say is that I think you commented in my book, or one person, one reviewer, it may have been Carrie Cooper, said, I like one word in your book. When I was going out with a person of a sales background saying, now come on, Pete, what are we going to sell them? Is it tests? Is it courses? Is it consultancy? I said, no, we're just going to listen, which is the most important characteristic of all. If it's not in our field, we should say that. But just listen to and see if we can help them with their particular problem. Because they need our help, yeah? If it's not our field, do say so. Because if you treat the client well, they have a strange habit. He said, what's that? I said, they come back. They come back. You only build a good business, yeah, by treating your clients well, doing a good job. If it took me a couple of days more than I said, I didn't charge for it. I would do it, for that price. And that meant they will come back for the next product. And that is how it grew, not by marketing, as many people thought. We didn't have a marketing officer of any kind for a long time, but by recommendation. From one HR person to another, often at what was then IPM events. Say, go and have a look at this company. And that, of course, is the best form of marketing that you can do. Try and do a good job.
It takes effort. And as far as training the staff, one of the things that always stood out for me is when you were creating that psychometric training center for SHL, you even trained the waiters.
Waitresses, yeah. They went through our courses. Mm-hmm. They did our courses. So when on a Wednesday they were having breakfast, Joy came up and said, oh, are you doing correlation this morning then? They were in shock. Everybody said, well, have you done the course? She said, yes, I've done it. And I got through it. So basically everybody at the center, yeah, the waiter and waitresses knew what the people were doing that particular time and what stresses they were under. The customer service those people gave was incredible, because I realized that when people go on a course, it was so bad when you're running a good course and you've got continual complaints about the food, right? For example, or the bad room they've got her in, or whatever. So by getting our own management center and negotiating to get it with a union was interesting. We can control the food, and we actually employed our own chefs who won international awards. But the secret we had is that people pre-ordered in the morning what they wanted in the evening. So the wastage was very low. One of the major factors in running a restaurant, because my son started in that area, William Saville, of Unilever fame now, is the problem of wastage. So we knew exactly how many fillet steaks or how many bits of chicken we needed. So we could, and also we made it on a buffet basis, so people could actually choose what they want. And we got renowned. I think people came back for the food as much as the course. But also we had I put a swimming pool in, I put two tennis courts in, we put a tiny little golf course in, which is the land that was dug up for a new bedroom block. So in my opinion, when you go on a course, the actual facilities, are important, and the way the staff treat you. Also, we had a bar, which was not a public bar. Many of our course delegates were female because they're in HR. And then when they're in a hotel, they go down to the bar and feel quite exposed. Of course, in our bar, which was private bar, they could all meet up as a group. So many were rearranging to come on the second 5-day course, having gone on the first one on the Friday. So having our own management center with very good food and a gym and all of these facilities, meant that we were sometimes running 16 5-day courses in any one week. I don't think the opposition, many people outside, realize how many we were actually training. And all of those became customers, because what we did with that training, we went right through norms, Z-scores, normal curve. We taught them how to calculate a correlation coefficient in 20 minutes, which they hadn't seen before. By the average Z-score cross product, they could then understand reliability, the standard of measurement, validity theory, and even to utility. So within those 5 days, they found it tough. But I found that if you keep the courses tough, people don't complain. They're spending all their time trying to keep up. If it was too slow in my early days, I found that people complain. Not if it's a tough course. Then they were given a test at the end, okay, and it was open book and it was marked immediately, and they went away with a certificate, being well trained, and they would not use anybody else. Because when they got other companies coming in with salespeople with no background, who had no knowledge of the difference of basic concepts like reliability and validity, they didn't want to know them. So basically I know we can't have 10 days training then, but we train them so well, it's what I think they call in business a barrier to entry. People coming in with other products who couldn't explain what reliability or validity was, were basically not impressive. But also it kept standards up effectively. And we only put in people who had about 5 to 10 years experience, not new graduates. I had all the war stories. They'd worked for air traffic control selection. They worked for the Royal College of Surgeons. They'd worked in this or that area. And that is a much different course than someone just giving a dry course on statistics. So we're always able to give good examples of where you apply this sort of information. So the courses, to me, were a vital factor in the success of the business, and was accounting for as much as 50% of our income. And of course, then they moved on to actually use the various tests we produced. First of all, the ability tests, and then a 4-year research program to develop the OPQ.
Which they paid for.
Yeah.
So
but they were pleased. I mean, the HR director of Mars, I think she had a PhD in chemistry. She's very impressive, said to me, if we can have things which are job relevant, because she said, after all, when they're so old fashioned and American to our British graduates, that's a bad sign to our applicants. We spend a lot of money on our graduate recruitment brochure, putting stuff in front of them, which is so antiquated. She said, we don't care what they cost. Now, we didn't take advantage of that, but she was making the point that, that if you come out with good and relevant materials, we'll be first in line to buy. And that was funded really from all of the courses we were running, which were great fun to run.
Yeah, in your book, I can see a picture of you being thrown in a pool while you're supporting a nice mustache there.
I used to have a mustache. I had flu when I was young. So in those days, Mexican mustaches were quite the fad. All right, so it's gone now. That was the degree of esteem I was held in as chairman. They picked me up and threw me in. That pool was put there because we could not get in the book for management centre quality, the green book or the red book, without a swimming pool. And I had a client who was with I think the Hilton Group, and said to me, do you know what is the most important factor people say for booking a hotel? What facility? I said, no, tell me. They say 80% say it's got a pool. Then she said, a swimming pool. Then she said, guess how many use it? I said, tell me. 5%. 5%. So one, we enable us to actually get into a particular book for hiring out the management centre when we needed to do it, and putting that pool in with the other facilities that we had of a putting green and a little croquet lawn, and also, of course, the tennis courts were. We often would play, the staff would play the people on the courses at 5 or 6 or 8-a-side football, mix, men and women on a Thursday night. So the fact my football team could train up there as well had nothing to do with it. So unfortunately, after I left, the management centre got sold for a special school. But I mean, in my opinion, having run course after course after course, some in good hotels, some in awful hotels, with people all complaining about the lousy food, I wouldn't. And also another problem was they sometimes were spending 2.5 hours over a lunch. Yes. I only want an hour to get on with the course. It was so slow. So there are lots of advantages. And also, when we met clients, they would often come down from London, mainly, or Northwest, or Manchester, or whatever, and come to our own management centre and actually see it, and it gave us more prestige. And I managed to buy it for £1 million.
Bargain.
Oh,
how much did the pool cost?
That's another story, negotiating with the union.
Well, what really stands out for me, Peter, from what you're saying, as you mentioned, that it's still within the box, so to say. You mix some ingredients, but it's the consistency which is really unique. It's the consistency with which you approach things, whether it is
putting 3, 4, 5 things together which we're known about, but putting them all together. Good design, good content, good people, good customer service, good training, which was to our clients' benefit and our own. Effectively.
And genuine care. Because to me, for example, I know you don't like this analogy, rock star of psychometrics, but I think from my perspective, you're kind of the David Bowie of psychometrics, because you keep reinventing yourself. So as you mentioned that when you started with SHL, you just put psychometrics on colored paper. And
I got confused with Donald Sutherland a few times.
Right. Well, that's a different one.
David Bowie, unfortunately.
Well, the thing is that what's really fascinating is when you mentioned about, then you started SHL, then you started Saville, and now 10X. And it always allows you to reinvent your tools. Because, for example, personally, I'm always suspicious to use a psychometric with the author's name on it, apart from yours.
Okay.
Because your tools are actually reinvented rather than selling stuff that was...
Well, we've made some tweaks. I could see ways in which things could be improved. So we've managed to actually get the validity slightly higher than anything else on a co-validation study, which will be published in the literature. I thought that there are certain things we could do. I suppose it's like anything. There's small improvements. Yeah. If you can improve something by 10%, as in fact the cost benefit is linear to the validity coefficient, not its square, as many people say, that's a big difference. A 10% improvement of every footballer, you know, in the Premiership for Spurs or Arsenal, whatever, would make a fantastic difference to their position in the league. So we've managed to actually up the validity, and we're approaching validities against specific competencies, you know, uncorrected above 0.4. So I didn't know if it'll work, and it has worked. I wasn't absolutely sure, but it has worked.
Excellent. And what
it would appear.
Well, what's also lovely to hear is that you said you're going to put in the literature, because so often one of my key concerns about where psychometrics is going. Of course, we get the big data, we have the analysis, machine learning, all that good stuff. But quite often it's like a black box. A lot of the publishers who do this don't publish it. And that makes me a little bit worried as a practitioner that we get more to black box thinking rather than open and discussing with warts and all.
Yeah, the paper's already been written, and we've got some academics not connected at all to review it for us, made some very useful suggestions. So we're putting 1 or 2 extra things in. So I think it's important that it does go in the literature, because I did do that with the APQ. There were certain studies. I'm a great admirer of the work of Jesus Salgado, who actually found that quasi-ipsative questionnaires actually predict better than Likert, much to everybody's surprise. His paper was published about 2014 or 2016. I think with personality, conscientiousness might generalize across most jobs, but it's really more a question of different scales of personality predicting given competencies. So, you know, a scale of innovation may not be relevant in one job, but it will be in another. And it's a bit more complicated than general reasoning ability or verbal and numerical, you know, reasoning ability in a person's own language.
Yeah, it all comes together. And as you mentioned, there will be a dashboard to present this in all understandable way.
Yeah, for HR like it, because it's all in one place. They've got their performance ratings, their 360 if they need it, motivation, engagement, well-being, personality, and also cognitive abilities all in one dashboard. And you could look at the effect of adding a person and who may be missing from a team using predictive analytics. Thanks to Ollie Anderson. I just wrote the instruments with Jason and with Jerry Ann, who's joined us from SHL as chief psychometrician. But Ollie has been responsible for the dashboard and interconnection of all that information. So the beauty is it's all in one place. And we're now producing learning and development interventions where people may need it, which will be delivered online.
That's beautiful. All in one place, useful,
place, yeah,
and informative. Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much, Peter. And I'm aware that there's quite a few people out there who want to ask questions, and I've just been talking for so long.
Sorry, my school report says he talks too much, so it hasn't changed, unfortunately.
Well, some personality traits just remain the same.
Yeah.
Plus, it's a matter of perspective. But I'm aware that Leanne Kenyon, you have a question?
I do. Hello.
Excellent.
So I'm doing a PhD in creativity and innovation in business.
Oh, how interesting.
And something in terms of the career route, I can't decide whether to go into consultancy or research, and I'd quite like to mix the two. And you were talking there about
You can mix the two. That adds to your credibility.
Well, that's the aim, really. But also, you know, I've done a couple of small projects with some clients before. And when you get into the underneath of how everything works, they're really interested. But how have you found getting clients or potential clients to engage in research has gone? I mean, are they really up for it, or do they want to keep everything kind of close to themselves, or they just want the answer up front?
When we started SHL, there was such a need because the NIP had gone broke. The instruments being used were American or old-fashioned. It was fortunate, perhaps we were very fortunate at that time, perhaps we were lucky, that there was a great need. And as soon as I resigned, I had the phone didn't stop ringing, with companies like Littlewoods, BP, Mars, all asked for me to keep me in business, basically. So, so surprised. So we were lucky then. Now there are so many providers out there, it's a lot more difficult. But, you know, combining, the problem is to doing, you know, a paper for a really top class journal can take a long time.
Yeah.
The other problem is sometimes the lead time could be 3 years or so before it's published. But I've not always gone for personnel psychology, which takes about 5 years to get published, because the amount of time to do that is enormous. But other journals instead. But tell me more about your interest in creativity, because it's a massive interest of mine. Because the term wasn't known then. I was one of those sort of 1% that was a good reader, bad speller. So I got D minus grades and so on, until they gave me spellings to learn a week before. And then I used mnemonics to remember them. So instead of getting none out of 20, I was getting 20 out of 20. So I was chunking the information, which my son Jack has also got the same problem, that random numbers he can't remember. But if you give him any algebra, his teacher has said at 11, in 2 years, he'll be above her, because he can see the patterns in it so quickly. So the area of creativity is much driven, it seems, from personality as much as really abilities. But I was lucky enough on my reports and to say, you know, he's D minus B, can't spell, but it put prolific with ideas, and which I've still got. I probably rather arrogantly have put it in the book to show that everybody, there's always hope. Well, gradually, I improved, and my spelling improved, because what I would do is shut my eyes and see the word effectively, and then keep learning it. And until I'd managed to improve my spelling. But you know, that comment about creativity appears through my reports, despite the poor grades. So it's an area of great interest to me. So what are you doing in the area of creativity?
Well, it's still very early on, but I'm hoping to see how much the research that's done on the cognitive side of psychology in creativity, how much of that is transferred into business consultancy for innovation in business, because a lot of that can either come from psychology or business schools, which might not have really taken in the hardcore psychology. It kind of just focuses on, you know, how do we get teams to just generate more ideas and hope it all works out, rather than, you know.
Well, I did see a review of the two things that people in industry, companies are looking for, organizations are looking for, are leadership, of course, and creativity.
Yeah, but I think one of the first questions I'm asking is, are we all meaning the same thing by creativity? Do they want a very specific type, basically the right answer that's going to make them money, or genuine creativity, which could be far more broad and actually come up with ideas that they wouldn't make money out of, but is genuinely creative?
Yeah, good question. I haven't actually done research into seeing whether, in fact, it can be divided up into different factors of creativity. I mean, I'm only aware of have you come across the Torrance test of creativity for children?
Yeah.
It's still going. It's quite old. I saw another measure of creativity where two completely random words are given, and you've got to get a connecting word between the two.
Yeah.
And creative children were able to connect completely random words which had no connection with one another, or things, yeah? and come up with something which actually, now whether that's really what we mean by creativity, we've got a lot more research to do. So that's why it's so fascinating.
Well, I'm working on it.
Well, it sounds fascinating. Do keep me informed on how you go.
Yes,
thank you.
Absolutely. And Leanne, if you need any sample or more people to complete any questionnaires you have, just let us know and we'll share with the network so everybody can participate.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, and I find this relationship between creativity and conscientious fascinating, because if you try to create items which are opposite of high openness, they quite often load on high conscientiousness. So it's actually quite hard to create a bimodal high and low openness without loading on conscientiousness. And conscientiousness is predictive of performance in a predictable environment. People with an unpredictable environment struggle with conscientiousness. So though we select for conscientiousness quite often into corporates, it's hard to also have creativity.
True.
My question would be, what is the benchmark of creativity for, and how it's correlated with higher openness? Because people low on openness have an idea of creativity, but it's usually problem solving, real world problems.
Yeah.
That's creativity for them. But with high openness, creativity is like drawing a Picasso. That's creative. So it's interesting what people would rate as being creative, differentiating on their personality.
And it is different in business as well, because there's no point in having a creative idea that you can't get up and running, which therefore you'd need conscientiousness afterwards. You need the openness and then conscientiousness. Do you have that just within a team, or do you need that within an individual person?
I think we need respect for both. One of the things that gets on my nerves is that we often are very stereotypical about what creativity is. And that's usually creating lots of ideas on the spot and being quite extroverted and maybe a bit low on agreeableness to push them through, rather than valuing creativity as being diverse. So yeah, fun and games. But talking about diversity, we have a question from Abigail. Abigail, about neurodiversity. Would you please unmute yourself?
Hi, I knew you were going to make me talk. I'm really keen because I'm dyslexic, and I struggle in doing certain tests. And the one thing that frustrates me more than anything is that you never get feedback. And it's normally a group of questions and scenarios, and you just get a pass or a fail, but you don't know which bits you got right and which bits you didn't. And I feel that I'm really enthusiastic, as Nikita will tell you. I'm really passionate. I definitely want to work in the field of occupational psychology to help people. And I just wondered, how much do people actually take into account neurodiversity? And again, it touches upon the creativity in a sense, is that I am ridiculously creative, but I can't pass tests. So I feel like people are missing out on me and a lot of other people because we can't get past the psychometric side of it to a certain degree.
Are they all tests? I mean, verbal, numerical, or are they all tests?
I tend, the ones that I've done, have been a combination of different ones, and I couldn't tell you which ones have done well or not.
Don't you get a feeling of sort of like with non-verbal, diagrammatic sort of tests of that kind?
See, I'm a lot of an overthinker as well. So if I'm given certain situations and how would you do in these situations, I'll definitely overthink them. I'm
not a bad thing sometimes. I was accused once of thinking too much, and I thought, well, how do I stop thinking? That was that girl I mentioned when I was young. So I think too much.
Plot thickens people.
Missed out.
Well, actually, at a friend went to, quite a funny story. A friend of mine went to what do you call it? A birthday party of hers about 30 years later. So what happened to Peter? And he described it. I said, well, he's in charge of £1 million company. She went, oh my God, I'm married to a man. I rang it and walked off. So that was quite funny at the time.
No, you wanted to set the record straight.
I mean, overthinking. If I've got a problem, I'll perseverate and perseverate on it, but unfortunately, until I can see a solution to it. And I often find the old adage of sleeping on a problem, does help. I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with an idea, and I'd keep a pen and paper by the side of my bed. My wife goes mad, but I write that quickly down because by the next morning I've forgotten it. And it's often quite a good idea to actually solve that particular problem.
Yeah, in terms of the neurodiversity, do you take...
I'm all for that because you need creative people in organisations, and you need structured people in organisations because of the different tasks. Absolutely.
Yeah. So how would somebody with neurodiversity get past the test to kind of showcase our talents?
Well, I think you can have neurodiversity, because I almost definitely was dyslexic. As I said, it wasn't used as a term then. I wasn't tested, but I just couldn't spell for my life. Strangely enough, my grammar was good. But to me, grammar has got a logic.
Yeah.
You know, when a word like pneumonia was put up, it never occurred to me it began with a P. You know, but so I find the English language extremely difficult to cope with, because it's completely irrational, and in my opinion, its spellings. So basically, by overlearning, I got better in that area. But funnily enough, I could always read well. Perhaps it was laziness. I read very quickly, and I never absorbed the actual spelling of that word. But with spell check now, even then, it doesn't catch on to the word I'm trying to actually put down. But luckily, I found that I could still write essays okay. So I did English language at A level, sorry, English literature at A level. And I used to write poetry as well. But I couldn't spell. That creativity and neurodiversity, I think a new perspective is drawn that you can't get through those screening tests. You know, needs to be given some thought. Do you get no feedback on them? Do you get any feedback?
Unfortunately not. The latest one that I did was actually for the NHS graduate scheme. And I just thought that would suit me to a T. I'm doing that role and I'd gain all the experience. And I couldn't get past the test. There's like 5 different sets of tests, and you didn't get any pass or fail on any of them.
Do you know how many people were applying? Because one problem, of course, is that at the moment for young people, and so many people, I mean, indeed, even people over 50, it's so difficult to get a job, because we've got such a high unemployment rate. I think the worst since the 1980s. And it may well be they're putting in extremely high cutoff on that test, as much as not passing it. Because I mean, a cutoff is arbitrary. There's no absolute way of setting a cutoff. So they may be setting the cutoffs extremely highly because they can't cope with the numbers. But really, where we can, I do like to see feedback, you know, to candidates, because that's the way ethically it should be. And also I remind clients that they're often their customers as well. I remember one online test, which was numerical, and someone took it, it was with a major bank, and it said failed right across the screen. That was it. I thought, well, charming. You know, I think I'll change my account if I was that individual. So, but of course, the time taken to feedback is the problem for many companies. Is there, you know, we give feedback instantly to people with a PDF report. In 10X, that's what we've designed. So we give you feedback on how you've done. So a PDF report is sent back out to you if you apply for a job.
That'd be really useful, especially because I don't even know what direction to go in. Like, what do I need to learn? What was I doing wrong? Do I need to change my way of thinking? But then I'm like, hang on a minute, that's me. So it's something, because I'm just doing my master's at the moment in organizational and occupational psychology.
Where are you doing that?
Just because I felt like I needed some sort of credit and validation that I could be good at what I want to do.
Where are you doing that?
At Northumbria. I'm actually one of the participants for a trial for some research that you're doing as well. We've just been sent that, so I've just signed up for that as well.
What one's that? I've got Ella here who's just joined us. So
it's got a funny name.
The X Project?
I'm trying to look at my email now to see what I signed up to.
Sounds very James Bond like, the X Project.
Yeah, we called it the X Project. Yeah.
OASYS. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Oasis.
Is that how you say it?
Well, I mean, the Oasis was the actual platform for Saville assessment, not us.
Ah, right, okay.
Platform. Oasis, but I doubt they would have used that name in a try. I don't think that's. Are you sure it's come from 10x psychology?
I'll double check it.
Yeah, do check.
Yeah, but I know I've just signed up to something anyway in terms of helping with a platform.
Nice. Well, actually,
so we have feedback for personality, motivation, and all of the ability tests that you take. PDF, which comes back instantly.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that.
I think one should do that.
Yep, absolutely. It's best practice. Otherwise, you put all this time and you don't get anything back, so you don't know what to improve. Is it your numerical? Is it your verbal? You have no idea. And also always kind of say that if you do have neurodiversity, dyslexia, always say this is part of your application, because they should be making reasonable adjustments. And
go on, sorry.
Sometimes they would not take cutoff scores. So for example, if you are using cutoff scores in selection to pass to the interview, sometimes if you do have neurodiverse candidates, they might suspend the cutoff score just to give you the interview as well, to see the kind of the wholeness of the candidate. So that could be also a possibility with some employers, because reasonable adjustment can be quite different depending on.
William, who runs a big IT company now, he was assessed by an educational psychologist. He got extra time. And my 11-year-old son, Jack, has also got dyslexia, but his twin sister has not. And he's getting 25% extra in the exams he's taking at the moment. It's most strange when you look at his vector scale profile. He's about the 2nd percentile on remembering random numbers and 99th percentile in numeracy.
Wow. So
logic. Abstract reasoning.
Yeah, that is a very interesting.
So he qualifies immediately for being dyslexic. I think the requirement is 2 Z-score differences. But like me, if you give me a phone number, I can't remember it. So we have time adjustments on our tests and accessibility options, darker screens, larger text, screen readers, etc. Are all designed within the platform.
Absolutely. So there's a few platforms like which were mentioned in the chat right now, where you can practice psychometrics. So you can actually practice them online or print them off or have a marker, play around with what format works for you and makes it easier for you. And then, because usually if you say you're dyslexic, when you complete an assessment, the assessor should call you and ask what worked for you before. So if you say, I want it in printed copies so I can mark it, etc., they should make those reasonable.
And you can improve. I mean, anybody that says that this test is uncoachable, there is no human behavior that cannot be coached. As John Adair said about leadership, we can all improve our swimming, but we can't all be Olympic swimmers. He put it well. Yeah. Of course we can improve our swimming if we work at it, and that's enough to get you over the hurdle. So access to those things online, or even there are books on Amazon to practice that, because very often when you're looking through a multiple choice test, quite frankly, you've got 5 options and you don't know if you don't know the answer, but the word ends in itis, I'd guess it's something to do with medicine. It's a disease. So if I don't know, I tick that and move on. And of course, many people actually get stuck on one item they can't do when they should just leave it alone and move on. So there are techniques in taking tests, just like any human behavior, whatever it is that can improve your performance. Because I used to argue if I could take a child for a few days, I could probably improve their IQ on an IQ test by about 15 points.
Yeah, it's practice and determination. I mean, when I was applying for graduate roles, I started up with scoring 25, 30th percentile on numerical tests. In 2 months, I was scoring 95th and above. It's just practice, finding short keys, but practice, practice.
And actually, we used to send out practice tests when we were SHL, pencil and paper practice tests, for people to do them. And I was accused by one HR person, from one HR person, of distorting reality.
What?
I said, well, if they practice their numeracy and they improve it a bit, yeah, what's the correct score? What they were without practice or what they are with practice? If I know I've got to take someone out there and play them at table tennis, right, and they're good, yeah. I knew a guy once that used to play for England, and he'll take you on with a frying pan and still beat you with a frying pan, yeah, at table tennis. He was so good. Now, if I got to play someone, I'll get out there with my son and actually practice for a few hours, and I'll improve considerably. So it's not true that, in fact, tests are uncoachable. There are, but the thing is, of course, you can have intelligent guessing as well. You look at 5 options to say, well, it can't be that one. It can't be that one. It's probably that one there. And I do remember a Professor Green years ago, he actually put in a series of random words and you had to choose, and they didn't exist. And you had to choose what was the correct answer. He correlated that with the Vector scales and found that bright kids went for certain options. So he could measure ability, yeah, by the way they actually guessed. And what they were doing was using outside knowledge to actually say, well, as I said, for an example, like itis, that's probably some sort of disease. So I'll underline that. I thought that was quite a clever bit of research. So, you know, it's difficult to improve from the 1st to the 99th percentile, but you can improve by certainly 1 Z-score, 1 SD. And that's enough to get you through the selection procedure. So I would progress at looking at those options online, and even the various books that you can get to improve your performance there, and make sure that, in fact, the extra time is given for you.
Absolutely. And currently, Jessica just posted that in 10x Psychology, you have a whole page on invisible disability at work.
That's our Jessica, is it?
Yes, it is.
Right. Hey,
Yeah,
Jessica.
it's a article that my colleague May Huxley has written on invisible disabilities at work, and we cover some of these points on how our tools take into account neurodiversity. It's a great read.
Excellent. Thank you, Jessica.
Jess, take over. You're doing a better job than me.
Well, what did you say about employing capable people?
Yeah.
That knows their stuff. So practice what you preach.
Yeah.
By the way, I noticed that, Richard, you have your hand up. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes, Nikita, thank you for noticing. I'm really honored and humbled to be here. It's an honor to hear from you, Dr. Peter. So honored. So my question would be related to kind of what Abigail was discussing. So I kind of did a recent assessment a few months ago with Think Ahead UK. It's a psychological organization. Perhaps you've heard of it. And I went through the assessment and I studied a bachelor's in psychology with human resource management. So I went through the assessment and it asked quite, the questions were actually quite challenging technically, because when I was looking at the different scenarios, there's multiple choice options. That was the frame structure of the questions. But what they focused on is how do you deal with the possible client? It's a different psychological patient and scenario that I was assessed with. So it really looked like it were, for example, if I was going to be assuming the role of a social worker with the NHS, and I was close, but I didn't pass the assessment, but I wasn't quite sure exactly why. So maybe you could give me insight.
I don't know that. Is it a British company?
Yeah, Think Ahead UK. They specialize in psychology and focused on different roles like volunteering initiatives. So I applied for being part of their kind of program, short internship program. And the questions were very technical. Like in my when I studied psychology, I learned the theoretical constructs, and I obviously conducted my own dissertation in my final year and thesis. But when I thought I had the obvious answer within the assessment, a lot of the answers seem like it's a trick question.
I hate trick questions. I hate trick questions. What I would do myself is I would immediately ask to see the manual for that test and what validity they got for it. Because a number of times I've seen, I'm not saying with them, I'm not saying that at all, but very often with home-based tests, yeah, not done by companies, yeah, there's more than one correct answer. I mean, very much questions to avoid are odd person out questions. What is the odd person out? There was one in the old 16 PF, which is the odd word out, some, any, most. And I found the keyed answer correlated negatively with all the other 25 items. It correlated negatively. So if you put the keyed answer, you're of lower intelligence. Some, any, most. What's the odd one out? Well, you could say any, because it's got 3 letters, where some and most have got 4. I didn't put that. Some, any, most. What's the odd man out?
Yeah. Absolutely, Richard. If you're in doubt.
I found the best answer, not the keyed one, it was most.
Nice.
Most.
Which I put because it's more than some and more than any. It's a more definite quantity.
Yeah.
But I think the keyed answer was some, but it correlated negatively with the other 25 items of ability on the old 16 PF.
Some items.
Odd man out questions just really tend to, I know with children working in educational research, tend very often just to put emphasis on their creativity to see different reasons why any word could be the odd man out. So what I would do with such a test is I go straight to the manual.
Yes.
What evidence is there for reliability? What evidence, if there are trick questions, this can lead to low reliability, and perhaps worse of all, there is no reliability data at all. Right. And validity.
I very much agree with you, Peter. If you're in doubt, Richard, always ask for the manual and ask to speak to the publisher or the person responsible for the assessment. I heard a recent one from a recent assessment. Somebody was assessed as part of a job interview. And the questions that got asked in Psychometrics, I'm suspicious of ladies who wear rouge.
Oh.
So he immediately asked for the manual and they couldn't explain why they were asking it. Because, oh, it's something to do with this. So whenever you're in doubt, it means the assessment has low face validity, literally. Yeah. It's like, why are you asking me this? Just ask them, like, why are you asking
low
me?
Empirical validity as well, I'm pretty sure.
Potentially, indeed.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly, that's what I was thinking and what actually happened, because one of the questions, I gave some logical answers, like it was many that I think there were 30, but for the logical answers, I had to sit and think, and obviously then I had to narrow it down to what makes the most logical sense, as Dr. Peter has clarified with me. So it's a process of kind of looking at what is logical and then eliminating the odd one out. But there were some questions indeed, like more than half of the questions were proceeding with regards to if you're working with a client, for instance, and you meet the client that you're working with, and then they're giving you personal information, or they're asking you as the psychologist kind of what approach would you have, and would you give them information, or that kind of sense. So in that sense, it's kind of clear that you wouldn't give them any direct information that you're on their case, or anything that would stress them out. But instead, you would find a more convenient time as an option. If that was the option, finding a more convenient time to speak with them. So for that instance, that's a more logical response.
Absolutely. So it depends by question, but just ask them. But thank you so much for that question, Richard, and giving us that example. But whenever you're in doubt why you're being asked a question, just go back and ask the publisher or the employer, why are you asking me this? You have every right to ask, and you always ask for feedback because they should provide you with that data. And I'm just really happy that 10X.
And if they claim the validity of the test is 0.99, there's something seriously wrong.
Yeah.
Because you never get validities that high.
No. Oh.
0.6 seems to be about the limit because of the problem of the reliability of the criteria that we actually correlate with.
Absolutely. Nothing is perfect.
No.
But one needs to know the intersection of...
That can cut your decision errors by more than half. Even about a 0.3 under the right conditions, can actually substantially improve your recruitment process.
Absolutely. I mean, Peter, talking about correlations, what are your thoughts that with personality assessments, we can only get like correlation of 0.4, 0.5 on a good day with performance? And people tend to obsess about that quite a bit.
Well, a lot of them square it, which is completely wrong. I mean, Brogdon showed it wrong in the 1950s. Cronbach and Glaser in their book Psychological Tests and Personnel Decisions showed it completely wrong. Hunter and Schmidt showed it completely wrong. The return is linear to the correlation coefficient. Mm-hmm. What they're talking about is shared variance, which is a different question. Different question. The return of a selection procedure is the validity coefficient times the mean Z score of a person on the test, times the standard deviation Y, which is the difference between the output of a 50th and 85th percentile performer, which can be difficult to calculate, except times the number of people that you take on, minus minus the cost of testing. Mm-hmm. Which Cronbach and Glaser said, if the cost of testing is about £100, and you can improve selection by even 10%, the cost of testing would almost disappear from the equation. Now, Cronbach was not involved in testing himself. He was a great psychometrician. I think his book on essentials of psychological testing is the best, personally. But it's clearly linear. But you still get taught at university that you square the coefficient. You don't. It's actually linear. So a 0.2 correlation is half as good as a 0.4. Now, if you can get a 0.4 correlation from one variable, it may be you can add another with a low correlation with the first variable or predictor and actually get it to around about 0.6. In that case, you've got a very, very valuable selection procedure. And getting much above that is in fact difficult, because the problem is, if you take things which are so-called objective, like sales performance, it's not completely objective. That will depend on your region. When I looked at pub managers in the book that you mentioned, the problem is location had a massive effect on the poor pubs are all shut now, but a massive effect on the return, and they tend to actually take people and move them into the bigger pubs as they prove successful. So when you look at sales, that can depend on luck, your manager, your region, and other factors. So those so-called objective measures are still, to some degree, prone to luck and chance. But you can certainly distinguish between the top third and the bottom third performers. So I'm not saying give up, but it's been called the criterion problem, that we're often taking a relatively objective test and actually correlating it with a very subjective measure like an appraisal. And I've seen situations where very high performers are marked down, because they're a threat, or in fact they want to push them on in a company, and low performers are marked up because they feel sorry for them, which makes the actual appraisal score that you get a nonsense. They take sympathy on the low performers and push them up. So I found with one major FTSE 100 company, on a 5-point rating scale, the mean was about 4. There's always a push up towards the high end of the scale, and the standard deviation was only about 0.3. So virtually everybody was actually scoring between a score of 3 and 5. If you went to 1 and 2, HR had to come in and actually do a review. So they avoided those scores, managers. So I would collect information on work performance, which is separate from the appraisal data myself. So I remember Sir John Harvey Jones of ICI saying to me, you know, he said you can distinguish the top third of performers, you can distinguish the bottom third. The problem is the middle third. Yeah, in which direction will they go? Some out the middle third will move up to the top third, and some will go down to the bottom third. And I think research shows it takes about 2 years before it's the ideal time to assess a person in a job to know how well they're actually doing. Mm-hmm. It takes that long to know them. After that time, you tend to prefer them because, in fact, you get on with them and for other factors. But he made a good comment that, you know, when he was in charge of ICI, bringing it to massive profits, the real stars you could see, the people who were struggling you could see, but that middle third was a difficult part because some of them will move up to be stars. But if you see in a manual, as I've seen recently, claim validity to 0.95, no, you just don't get that. Something odd is going on.
Maybe some of that creative accountancy.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, well, I'm aware we're coming towards the end of the talk, and I'm just curious, Peter, what would be like your key words of advice to graduates out there? Because we heard already of people looking for jobs, applying, being assessed with all sorts of varying psychometrics. What would be a top advice for young graduates?
Practice your interviewing skills.
Mm-hmm.
They say in interviewing, you should always know the company well.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure your CV doesn't contain spelling errors I've seen. Or you know, look at my LinkedIn profile for an applicant. That won't do. Mm-hmm. In interview, there are, you know, body language is important. Lean forward slightly. Look interested. Smile at the interviewer. Unfortunately, try to avoid disagreeing with them unless you've got a good reason. I don't like questions in interviews with trick questions in them where they judge you on just one question. That's very unreliable. Put it in a test. But basically, what we've got to do is get this blasted economy moving. You know, so that there are more jobs out there. We've got to get this economy moving. Because, you know, there's perhaps really an oversupply of masters in OxPsych and a lack of jobs at the moment. I really hope next year that will change. But it's difficult for young people now coming out of university because people ask for experience, but as a requirement, but they don't get their experience without getting that first job.
Yeah, the vicious catch-22. And I'm just curious, what do you think is the key areas for occupational psychology to apply itself in order to build up the economy, or how?
Well, time and time again, there's Professor John Sterling on a big think tank has said that, and he goes in great length, said the most important thing that HR can do is get the right person in the right job. Now, I think that things like well-being through the COVID crisis has moved up, of course. The issues of remote working have come up. But he looks at the economic argument, and a friend of mine who's a professor of economics at Durham did some calculations. He said if we can improve the output of people by better selection of 10%, the effect on GDP will be absolutely enormous. So getting the right person in the right job, I find very few CEOs disagree with that. Yet in many HR courses, selection methods aren't that well covered. They're not that well covered, selection methods. So, but nevertheless, we've still got the issues of well-being in the workplace, of course, and the issues of remote working, which problems that we're going to have for some time. But in the end, we want the right talent in the right jobs. That would be my advice.
So to work on that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for joining us today. And it's been a true honor, and it's absolutely brilliant. And by the way, just can you let us know? So you mentioned that 10X personality tool is coming in January. When will your book be released, and how can people purchase it?
It will be on Amazon, and it will be about mid-January.
Mid-January.
Yeah.
Perfect. Wonderful. Any closing words or remarks before we finish?
Thank you again for the session, Dr. Peter, and hosting it, Nikita. I really appreciate it. I just had a question. So I am still considering my master's after just completing my bachelor's degree. I do have a
Richard, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry. So I'm really honored to be here, and thank you for the informative and really helpful session, Dr. Peter and Nikita, for hosting. I just had a question with regards to any recommended maybe universities for master's programs that I might be encouraged to look at if for my master's program in organizational psychology, or possibly public health, the field of public health. That's my kind of areas that I want to get into.
So
Ella, you're here, public health? That's not really my area.
I don't know, maybe look at league tables.
Just look at the league table, she was saying, yeah?
nice, very pragmatic.
Yeah, look at the league. Yeah, unfortunately, public health is not so much my area. I don't know much about that.
But there's coming quite a few recommendations through the chat, Richard. So that should be helpful. And yeah, so it's also what you make of it. So when you do get your MSc, do study, network, build up your relationships, and find what you love in OxPsych, because that's the key thing. Because I still remember when I was hired, it was my first job as a duty psychologist, not junior psychologist like Peter, but duty psychologist, a little bit of a rebrand. And I remember the hiring person, you have none of the right experience, but you seem to have the right attitude, so we'll give you a try. So find out what you love. Because as you can see, in Peter's case, even if you love psychometrics, you can make an extremely successful career out of it.
Well, thank you for the honesty and the actual expression on your experience, because I think it's really valuable to understand how do you really get into the field and what individuals have already achieved. So for you to share your experience with me, and that really helps me a lot, like just finishing my bachelor's, like you can imagine. So, but yeah, I've always had a passion to instill and inspire and empower individuals and change their lives for the better. So psychology would have always been in my field of study and research as well, because that you can never have too much research. Research is always constantly evolving and changing the way that we as humans interact with our world around us. So it's fundamental.
Absolutely. And that's definitely a good place for occupational psychologists to go. Well, Peter, I just want to wish you every success with 10X Psychology.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to try your instrument in January.
Good. And thank you for hosting this very much, Nikita.
Oh, anytime, Peter.
I'm going off to my martini now.
Excellent. Well, James Bond, we've been expecting you. I just need a white cat.
Yeah.
My cat has went somewhere. Anyways, thank you, everybody, and see you at the next one. And thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you.
All the best. Bye.
All the best.